Well, my stepdad, who you met, Merle Cooper, will turn 100 on February 9th,
Wow.
2021. And because of COVID, we're celebrating remotely with family and the friends who are still left. He has outlived so many of his close friends, which is, of course, regretful, and my mom included. But he had quite a story, part of which you recorded and captured growing up in West Virginia in 1921 in a segregated society. He did not have an opportunity to go to high school, and actually his mother worked as a domestic to send him to what was at that time called a Negro college. It was essentially a high school experience, but taught by professors who had PhDs and were preparing these students for a college level education, knowing that few would have that opportunity. And he remained at the school until 1938. His mother ran out of money, and so he was not able to graduate. But it was also at that time that he decided to move north to have a more full opportunity without living in a segregated society. So he left on a segregated train from West Virginia, and 2 years ago we took him back. He had not been back since then, and so it was really emotional to walk through the town, very near Harper's Ferry, which has a tremendous amount of history, and told stories. And the Park Service now owns the school where he was attending, called Storer College, and they were so excited. They don't normally let people in from the public, but here this 98-year-old man is coming, who attended the college and the school, and so he was a little bit of a celebrity, and they asked him all sorts of questions, and his memory, as you probably recall, is phenomenal. So he could pull back stories of professors and people that he knew from the college, and identifying buildings on the campus, even where the dean used to sit on the porch and kind of study where all the students were going and what they were doing and who was seeing whom. And so he's a remarkable man. But he went up through the ranks, starting as a bus driver, and then moved up to become vice president of the International Transportation Union after he was president of the Transport Workers Union in Philadelphia, and then retired from that position 1988, somewhere around there. Yeah, but quite a man. Yeah.
So you're a native of Philadelphia?
Yes, although born in Mainz, West Germany, but the fact I still call it West Germany ages me right there. But yeah, I grew up in Philadelphia.
So were you a military brat?
My father was in medical school at University of Mainz, so he and my mother met as undergraduate students. He went to Lincoln University, and my mom went to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, and so they were both in the sciences and met. And then he had some difficulties here in the United States and decided that Europe was more friendly at the time, and so they moved there. And my brother was born shortly after, well, not shortly after, but after they were married in Philadelphia, and then they moved to Germany, and where my sister and I were born. And so that was my begining. Yeah.
So your beginning in Germany, did you have any, were you there long?
I was not there long thereafter. My grandmother was ill, and so we returned to Philadelphia at that point to care for her, and then she passed shortly thereafter, and then my parents did divorce, so then we were raised in Philadelphia.
Were you an Eagles or Phillies fans?
Eagles, definitely. And I was always a passive fan. If Rod sees this, I don't want him to out me and say, you are no true fan. I can tell you some things about teams, but don't give me stats. I just remember when the hockey team, the Flyers won the Stanley Cup, and I was in high school, and we all just walked out of school and went down to Broad Street, and we were all just, whether you were a fan or not, it was, celebrating the Stanley Cup. So.
Graduated from high school in Philadelphia?
Yes, Philadelphia High School for Girls, which was my mother's alma mater, and probably there's something similar in Boston, the Latin School, where it's single sex, but you test in, so there are girls from all over the city who attend, and so it was a place that, yes, my mother went, my sister went, I had to go, so it was a great experience. I loved it, yeah.
And did likewise when your college decisions occurred, was that guided by your mom?
Somewhat, yes. I was not as smart as my brother and sister. They both went to University of Pennsylvania. That was the idea, and that I did not successful. I was not admitted. So the next choice was Dickinson College. I wanted to go to Boston, but yes, my mother said, no, you're going to go to Dickinson, and which was a wonderful school, and small liberal arts and great education. So that's how that was decided.
Very familiar with Dickinson.
Yes.
So you're there at Carlisle, and was law part of the conversation when you were in Carlisle?
Not at all. I really had no intention or real interest in going into law. I really didn't have a strong feeling for what I wanted to do when I graduated. My brother and sister knew right away. My sister wanted to go to law school. My brother wanted to go to medical school. I was not that focused. So when I graduated, I actually worked for the college for a number of years in admission with a degree in English literature, a Bachelor of Arts in English literature. And my sister convinced me to go to law school later. She just said, even if you don't practice, it's a wonderful education. And I love to debate and analyze issues. And so she said, well, I think you'll find some pleasure in it. So.
Well, what school did you go to?
Cleveland Marshall. When I moved to Cleveland in 1985, I still was not thinking about law school, and I was working in Philadelphia for the Defense Procurement Management Administration, which is essentially the part of the government that manages materials for the military. So it's where flags were made for the United States, all sorts of military gear, uniforms. So I worked in value engineering, which was essentially reverse engineering items to see if they could be made cheaper, better. So when I left there and moved to Cleveland, that's when I worked for the Defense Contract Administration Management, which is post-production, and oversaw the procurement of essentially military armory, or missiles, Mark 46, Sidewinder missile, that sort of thing. So I worked with TRW and Chromalloy and Argotech and a few other major manufacturers. So I was a contracting officer at that time.
Did you think your paths ever crossed with Marty Coyles at TRW? He was general counsel then. That's
really funny. I had not met him. I was working more with the vice presidents and the guys who were on the ground in manufacturing, but that's very funny. No, I had not had the pleasure of meeting him.
At some point, if you have any reason to reach out to him? drop a name or two?
I will. I've got to go through my Rolodex and see who he might remember. Bob Marion is someone I worked a lot with at that time. But yeah, that's going back to the mid-'80s.
Well, Henry King was there?
True. That was my first choice. I was admitted to Case, but they did not have an evening program, and so I was working full-time when I went to law school.
Okay.
And this Case certainly has a great reputation, but Cleveland Marshall does as well. A lot of the judges in Cleveland are certainly from, they're Marshall grads. The judge I ended up working for was also a Marshall grad when I went to the federal court.
So was that the progression? You graduate 3 years, and then did you try to get a clerkship? Was that?
That was actually something I had not thought about. I'd interviewed at several firms, but I was also, when I graduated from law school, I was, that was May. I found out that I was pregnant with my son. And so by the time I was admitted to the bar in November, I was, pretty pregnant. And realizing that with a new baby, the hours at a firm weren't just going to mesh well for me. So I had a law school friend who suggested that I pursue a clerkship, and that might allow for better hours and not be as stressful at the time with a newborn. So I interviewed at the federal court. At the time, the judge for whom I worked was not chief judge, but he became chief judge a year later, and enjoyed that experience enormously. I was given the privilege of being a career clerk, which is something that is an honor and certainly gives you a feeling of really understanding how the system works, and being able to work for one judge for that length of time was a real honor.
Judge George White.
Judge George White, yes, the first African-American judge in the Northern District of Ohio.
Did he appreciate that? Did he feel a sense of, well, honor, of course, but that maybe some pressures too also because of that kind of acknowledgement?
If you knew Judge White, he didn't feel pressure from much. He was probably the most even-keeled man I had ever met. Very, not only, he had a real sense of wisdom in terms of dealing with people. I learned a lot from him watching him on the bench, having respect for defendants, understanding that they were there to be sentenced for a crime, and his expectation was that he would never see them again. But he treated everyone with respect, felt that it should be a very collegial experience with attorneys. He never tried to humiliate attorneys, which was, I would say, true of most of the judges on the bench at that in the Northern District of Ohio. But he had a very keen sense of how to deal with the public. Just a very, very good man. Yeah.
Judge White, 15 years, federal district court. Any cases of note that you had to either sit in on, write opinions about, that you want to kind of a highlight tape?
There were a few. Probably one of the most interesting cases for me was a Thalidomide case that had a very long, torturous path to get to federal court. It was a woman who gave birth to a son in Germany at a base in Germany, and she actually worked to have an act passed that would allow for her to sue the federal government to allege injuries based on a doctor's recommendation that she take I believe it was aspirin, and that she felt that led to the deformities of her son. And obviously, thalidomide was given as the drug that many, I hate to use this term, flipper babies, were born with those deformities, and that she felt that she had a strong case for suing the government for damages for her son's birth defects. And it was a fascinating bench trial. So it was great to see, I cannot remember the name of the attorney from Washington. She was brilliant because it was evidentiary, and so it wasn't, dramatic, but they did such great prep work. And so it just felt like a clinic in terms of, trial practice and procedure, and to make this such a fascinating case, just really good lawyering. It was, to this day, it was just one of the most fascinating cases I've watched. But we had, not before Judge White, but a judge down the hall had the Trafficant case. Mm-hmm. I don't know if people remember Trafficant, but he was convicted of fraud and a number of other things. And if you remember him, he was theatrical. So every day was some hijinks with him.
Wasn't he a congressman? Or?
He was a congressman and had a very distinct toupee. And the reason I note that is because when he was convicted, because he argued that it wasn't, this is his real hair, and, it's kind of a very silly thing. But, when they convicted him, the jig was up. And so he was photographed without his vanity piece. And but it was Judge Wells, Leslie Wells, presided over that, and she kept things under control, but he attempted to derail things whenever he could. But an interesting trial.
Did he do a pro se?
Partially, and I'm trying to remember, even if he had an attorney, he was not to be shouted out. He certainly made himself known. So even if he had an attorney there, he didn't necessarily take his advice as well as he should. Yeah.
Was there conversation in the coffee room when this was going on? Because you obviously are working for Judge White, and this is going on next door. But did you kind of sneak in? Did you?
Yeah, I sat in a couple of the proceedings just because it was on the same floor, and if I had a break, I would just go down because it was a high-profile case, and he was an icon in Youngstown, Ohio, and it was interesting because when at that time we had so many drug conspiracy cases in Youngstown, in all of the courts, but certainly in Judge White's. And it was unfortunate because so many of the things that Congressman Trafficant did undermined the ability and the opportunities for many of the young people in Youngstown. So really their path forward was drugs, and they were, these conspiracy cases, you were putting away 18 kids at a time per case. So that was just an interesting dichotomy to watch at that time.
For the camera, what happened to Trafficant?
Well, he was convicted and imprisoned. I don't remember the length of his sentence, but he is now deceased. So the late, is it Jim Trafficant? I can't remember his first name, but he was convicted, and federal crimes, you serve at least 80% of your time. So maybe 5 to 10 years, somewhere in that range. I can't remember. But
do you remember Judge Wells and White talking at all? Do you remember any kind of behind the curtain, you can't believe what he did today type of things?
Not between the judges, no. The clerks, we would talk. But Trafficant was out there. So anybody who was in a proceeding would have had a show that day. But the judges did not tolerate a lot of hijinks. I mean, they gave you latitude, probably enough in this case to hang himself, but not to derail their court. They kept very tight controls over what went forward, but it was his style to be theatrical. So, whatever argument he made, it was dramatic. So, yeah.
So you're there for 15 years and a career law clerk, and that's a real honor. I mean, you should. That's we've met at least one of them at Screening's office.
Yeah.
So what was the takeaway? You have 15 years, and ultimately you have to kind of put that behind you. But that's 15 years of your life.
Yeah.
What was your takeaway?
The takeaway was a high respect for the bench. That the judges take all of their cases very seriously, work tirelessly on these cases, and the volume of work that they have to have a working knowledge of is breathtaking. And that I never saw a judge dial it in. Every judge who sat on the bench, because I had the pleasure of later working for all of the judges, had studied their cases. They knew what was before them. They knew their defendants or the plaintiff, and took to heart the gravity of what was in front of them. And I have always hoped that the public appreciated that it wasn't what they see on TV a lot, where there's shouting and this kind of silliness, but that the judges really live these cases and expected us to do the highest quality of work in terms of what we were putting in front of them, regardless of the outcome. That you never walked in saying that, well, this side's going to win, and that's essentially what the judge wants to find. That the judges wanted to know where they stood, and then let's go from here.
How did he operate? So you're there 15 years, and you also see people come in for a year, 2 years, the normal standard term. How did he operate with regards to writing opinions, trial memos, things like that?
Judge White, all the judges are different. Judge White, I was one of two career clerks, and we broke up the cases by number. I'd have odd, and he had even, and he let us do a lot of the writing, a lot of the drafting, jury instructions and opinions. He would give it his voice ultimately once we gave him a draft, but he gave us an opportunity to do a lot of writing. So, and then we had a lot of conversations. So it wasn't just I would give him a draft and then he would mark it up and return it to me. He would review it and then we'd discuss it, because there were lives involved, there were issues beyond the page. And so it was always important that we capture 360 degrees of the case. And so obviously what's on the record, but that we were truly understanding every aspect that was before the judge. So, which takes quite a bit of time.
So the trial ends, he dismisses the non-jury trial, mainly.
Mm-hmm.
And does he come in the office then and say, all right, Marion, sit down, let me give you my thoughts?
A little bit of that. He would start with that for a bench trial, because it was just him having to hear quite a bit of testimony. We might start there. It would depend on the case, but in that case, definitely we would talk. We knew what the law was. We knew what the issues were. They were very well briefed. So then it did come down to the testimony and some other details. But
Did they have you sit in on it?
yes, definitely. Yeah.
You always sat in on the case that was yours.
Yes. So.
Then while the other case, the odd or even one that your sidekick had, you would do your work, obviously.
Right. Unless it was a huge case that required all the clerks. I don't want to say the junior clerks, but the term clerks and interns. I'm trying to think, the Demyanya case. We all went down to watch. And that was Judge Mattia. Paul Mattia had that case. And that went through numerous incarnations. An excellent public defender. Demyanya had several attorneys, but at one point the federal public defender was his attorney of record, and argued brilliantly for him. This was I'm trying to think, it was the case dealing with his application for admission to the United States for his citizenship application, which was the first conviction that landed him in federal court. But he had a very, very good federal public defender.
So that Damiani case, is that floating through that? That was a high-profile case. Department of Justice all over that.
Yeah.
Including our good friend Eli Rosenbaum. I don't know if this would have been the 1990s time period?
That was before I came. I started in 93. June of 93 is when I started, yeah. And I think it was 91, somewhere in there, when that whole case started. I never met Eli at that time.
Did you ever see Damianic? Did he ever appear? Or was it just all motions?
I don't recall seeing him in person, although I know there were times he was in the court. I did watch his plane leave for Germany.
Ah, really?
Yes, because they had not a private, but it was a jet from Burke Lakefront Airport. And my office looked over Burke. And so the local news basically did a timeline from his home in Parma as he drove from Parma to downtown Cleveland, boarded the plane, and we're watching in real time that plane take off for Germany. And for us it was, those were decades in federal court, and to see that be what we assumed, and rightfully so, the final chapter of his life and case.
Did your judges talk about him? They didn't have it in front of the case, but it's clearly a Northern District, Ohio matter here.
Yeah. The judges, I'm sure they spoke amongst themselves about it, and their feelings they kept very close to the vest.
Sure.
But that was quite an era.
Well, your paths cross, and our hope is at some point we'll have Eli. He's willing to talk about the whole story at some point, so I'll have to go to Washington to do that.
I would imagine, yeah.
So that's great. So then you're kind of, with time, 15 years, really, 93 to 2008?
Well, actually the judge left, I thought it was earlier than that, 2000, I thought it might have been 98, because he went to the Cleveland Browns Foundation, and I stayed with the court as a staff attorney, and that's when I reported to all the judges in the Northern District of Ohio. So Akron, Youngstown, Cleveland, Judge Gwynn, Judge Oliver was chief judge when I was there. A number of the judges.
What was your role in being a staff attorney?
Well, we dealt with all pleadings from pro se clients. So, and death penalty, which seems like an odd combination, but we had a suite of offices, and there was a death penalty clerk, and then we dealt with civil pro se cases, obviously, because in criminal they would have representation. But anything that was filed, we would draft opinions for all of the judges, whether it was a lot of habeas cases. That was probably my specialty. We would also do civil rights, 1983 cases, qualified immunity, if it was also a case where a prisoner was claiming that they were abused, pretrial detainees. So yeah, we had a lot of, pretty much any case that was non-criminal that was brought by a pro se client.
Were you able to stay in Cleveland?
Yeah, I was actually just moved to the 19th floor.
Okay.
So yeah, I was still working for the court, and we were at that point. We moved from the Howard Metzenbaum Federal Courthouse to the Carl Stokes Courthouse, which was built. I'm not even remembering the year. I want to say 2002, 2001, because I remember we had a ceremony dealing with 9/11. But yeah, that was a 24 floor or 20 floor courthouse or federal building that included the courthouse, magistrates, U.S. attorney, immigration, and the Court of Appeals was on the 20th floor, and we were on the 19th as the pro se or staff attorneys. Yeah, so that was a fascinating time. Yeah.
So you worked that till when?
Till 2014, when I retired. Yeah, and yeah, wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Again, because you saw a real cross-section of cases, and again, it gave you the chance to find the voice of many judges, and because obviously they all had their own approach to dealing with these cases, and so we wrote a lot of summary judgment, dismissals, or opinions on why it should move forward. So.
You retired. Come here.
Yeah.
Talk about what happened.
Followed the love of my life. My husband and I dated long distance while I was working in Cleveland from 2006 until we married in 2014. I was at that time divorced and raising my son in Cleveland and didn't want to uproot him. And so my wonderful husband was patient and waited for my son.
That's the name, by the way. It's
Rod Beckerink, the one and only, who was a history teacher. And of course, I have to tell the story of where our first date was in Jamestown, the Jackson Center, and we had a tour by the one and only Greg Peterson. And my son got on the mailing list because he was studying World War II. And he's like, oh my goodness. He was blown away. And so the nerd family was in full bloom. But yeah, we loved the Jackson Center, and Rod took me there to impress me with all the wonderful things that Jamestown had to offer. So I was duly impressed. Yeah.
So that's your first exposure to the Jackson Center, and
Right.
It seemed to me, my history, as vague as it's getting, but it was really through Christy.
It was,
Yeah.
yes. Christy Zabrodsky,
Yes.
my neighbor and friend, and she asked, have you met Greg Peterson? And at the time, I didn't make the connection that I had met you earlier, but she said, oh, you should know Greg. He knows everybody, and just a good person. And we had lunch, and at that time you mentioned there was a possible opportunity to work at the Jackson Center. And so I put my resume together and interviewed with Jim Johnson. and Randy, and that was a long process, long vetting process, because before they made a decision, I think I must have attended a good 6 or 7 programs, and would just kind of wander around and show up and meet people. And I was at the premiere at that time of Liberty Under Law, and I stood next to Randy, and he said, well, I'll introduce you to Jamestown, essentially. And oh my God, there was the Lene Foundation. Linda Swanson came on crutches with her mother. It was kind of a who's who that night, and but it was a great opportunity to kind of meet the community and get a feeling for the work of the center, and have been enamored ever since.
You've been at the center. You're director of development of the Robert H. Jackson Center. And a lot of that is public knowledge. But what did you learn about him and the mission during these past 6 years? 7
almost.
Years? Yeah.
Quite a bit. I mean, my knowledge of Jackson was really based on his opinions only. I knew very little about the man, or his backstory, or obviously his work in Nuremberg. I knew of it, but it was an amazing opportunity to really bring it into full relief, working for the Jackson Center. And by that I mean making that connection for people to understand why he is so important and why more people need to know about him. And not just the man, but the idea behind who he was. That it is such a uniquely American story that never ages. And it is a story of the promise of the Constitution, that what does a life look like that is lived in that context, where Jackson just moved forward understanding that if you believe in this idea, then you believe that it applies to Japanese Americans, you believe it applies to African Americans, to Jehovah's Witness, and that the president is not above the law. I mean, he just kept that idea moving forward. And it wasn't necessarily from a personal experience as much as an enduring belief in what the Constitution provides. So that idea was incredibly exciting. The more I learned about Jackson and what he means to the world, and in development, it's everything, because we're trying to reach across the country and around the world, and explain why the Jackson Center is so important.
During this time period, we've had several programs. Do you recall a personality or two that you had a chance to get up close and personal with, that you kind of had some meaning to you?
The first person, I don't know why, it comes to mind is Floyd Abrams. I really enjoyed meeting him. Many programs I enjoyed. One of the early ones that I was riveted was a program you did on the First Amendment with Bill Hochul, who was U.S. Attorney at the time, Lee Coppola, and the editor from the Buffalo News. And it was one of these dreadful snowy nights, and the Kappa Theater was packed, and people just didn't want to leave. The questions and the issues, and you really had a strong sense of how important a free press is, and that every time you see a photo or read a story, there's a person behind that who decided, I'm going to stay, I'm going to get that last photo, I'm going to get that interview. And just how incredibly important that is, and the integrity of the people who work for the free press. So it was just a great night. And Robert Sy was wonderful when we did the program on the Jehovah's Witness, the anniversary of the Barnett decision. God, there have been so many. The Attica program, Heather Thompson was brilliant. I know I'm going to leave out a ton of people because I have had the privilege of being at pretty much every single program that we've had here over the past 5 years, and now this whole new Tea Time series that Krista McMahon has initiated. So it's been a great ride.
So you look in the crystal ball 5 years from now, Marion Beckerink looking at the Jackson Center, now knowing much more than you did when you first came there. What would you envision?
That it's a hub of it's a hub for university students. It's a hub for scholars. It's a place where people convene to discuss important issues of the day, from issues of law, where we're going as a country and where we're going as we relate to our image in the world. But everybody comes here, either remotely or in person, to the place where Jackson was first inspired. So that's what I would see for the Jackson Center.
I called you a couple days ago to come over here to be interviewed, and in that interim, not knowing that we scripted it, this is not scripted, by the way, for the camera. Were there any questions that you were anticipating I was going to ask that I haven't?
I thought you might ask me about my real father,
Okay.
Who was from Liberia, and that was another piece of my interest in the Jackson Center from the international law perspective, because he died during the coup in Liberia, and he had gone back to Liberia to practice and open a hospital in the 90s, and was very tied to that country as his home country, and just was devoted. And it was a terrible way for him to die. He was giving insulin. He was diabetic, and he was just giving away insulin to everyone who needed it. Certainly did not have it for himself. And then things were so chaotic. At the time he died, we were not able to go to Liberia. The State Department had a red flag up, and things were way too chaotic for us to travel to Liberia to pay our respects. And so seeing the prosecutors, the Charles Taylor case meant quite a big deal to me, because there was a time my dad was actually in the Tubman administration, the Tolbert administration, and then he was potentially going to be executed by Charles Taylor as an enemy of the state, and just by happen chance, it did not go forward. And so it was important to see the tireless work of the international prosecutors that still work in the shadow of what Jackson created. And so that has a very personal meaning for me in terms of how important that work is, that people be brought to justice for trying to dismantle a country and through violence. So
let me get the bio straight here. He's a native of Liberia?
He's a Kru. So he was not Americo. He was of the Kru tribe.
Okay. And then came over to the United States, met your mom. They both went off to Germany. You were born.
Right.
Came back here. A divorce occurred. Then did he go back to Liberia?
He did not come back to the United States with
Okay.
us, just my mother and my brother and sister. He stayed in Germany for a number of years and then went back to Liberia.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Was he a government physician then, or a government?
No. He was a member of WHO, but he was part of the administration, ambassador, or not, but director of health for a while, and then went off and started a private hospital. But yeah, so he had some ties to the administration initially, but the hospital was independent.
Did he die from?
I think it was, he went into a diabetic coma because of not having his insulin. That's what we could learn. His wife at the time called me, and it was a terrible day. I was finishing my law review note, and if you certainly know, that's just pages and pages of footnotes and other things, and it was due that day. And at that time, we didn't have these PCs. You were doing it, typing it longhand, and I got the call, and my head was just spinning. And as I hung up the phone, tried to make some calls to the State Department, and that didn't go forward. And then I thought, well, I've got a deadline. I've got to get this in. And one of my notes was off. The number was off. And so having to go back through and retype and rearrange was kind of a nightmare. So that was, I just remember it was like 11:45, being in Kinko's that night, crying and making copies and turning in the note. I think it was 12:01, and it was rejected because it was a minute late. So that was a bad day. But and obviously losing my dad was tough. So, but yeah, it was that was the only question I thought you were going to ask me. So.
No, the question now that I am going to ask is, since your son listened to that, no doubt, an erudite tour of the Jackson Center, talk about your son.
Oh, the love of my life,
Yeah.
other than Rod. My son, my only child, has always had an interest in music. He went on to graduate from George Washington University in D.C. and stayed there for a while, but toyed around with this music thing. He was in real estate in D.C. And I don't think I fully appreciated how creative he is musically. He was always very good, even though he went to music school and studied. He has a natural ear, which was a frustration because he hated to read music because he could play anything he heard. But he also was an amazing writer, which I didn't know. And so he decided he paid off all of his loans from college and that he was going to go out on his own and be a musician. And my son works hard at whatever he does. So I said, honey, go for it. You're young. You have no real responsibilities. This is the time. And through his own efforts, because I take no credit for this whatsoever, he started writing music and met a fellow in college through a friend who works for, I believe it's RCA Records, and I apologize if I'm wrong on that. But he wanted to manage a young musician, and so he and Josh got together and he put out his first, they don't call them albums, long playing disc, and it has gone gold. He will get a gold record probably within a few days now for his song Cold War, which was on the album. And then he's collaborated with several notable musicians, including John Mayer, John Legend, Taylor Swift, and to be given credit as Cautious Clay, he has had some great experiences. So I am extremely proud of him. He's currently working with Forrest Whitaker They've given him the position of executive producer on a series called The Godfather of Harlem, based loosely on a real character in Harlem around the time of Adam Clayton Powell. Martin Luther King is featured, Muhammad Ali, and Malcolm X are in the series.
Godfather in Harlem.
The Godfather of Harlem, and Forrest Whitaker plays the title character, and there are some jazz scenes. So Josh has written the music for a couple of those scenes, and so we're really proud of him.
So we look him up. It's under Cautious Clay.
Cautious Clay, not to be confused with Cassius, but Cautious Clay.
My son is abuzz about all his successes and keeps me posted.
Well,
You should be justly proud, and I'll take full credit for it. No doubt inspired by his visit at the Jackson.
Yeah, that's where it began.
But anyways, this has been fun, Marion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg. You are the consummate interviewer, so thank you for the opportunity to chat. So you make it easy.